So it's been a little bit since 3.6 started and the brand new endgame mode Anomaly Arbitration did release. I've been doing a lot of runs in it, and I think I do finally have my first overall impressions on what I do want to say about that mode. And so in this video, I'm going to be doing exactly that, talking about my experience with it and what I do think of it as someone who did go ahead and zero cycle it, because I do have a few things I do want to say about this game mode specifically. Before I get into the video, be sure to check the description to join the Discord server, as I am trying to advertise it as much as possible. It's got everything you want, a general chat for anything non-gacha related. There's gacha channels for Sorrow, Genshin, Arknights, and so on. Feel free to join, be active. I'm trying to get as active as possible. I'm in there a lot. Again, link is in the description. Let's get straight into the video. So this kind of approach to an endgame was kind of something I did want for a while. Like, for ages, I've been asking for a mode where people like me who support the game a lot, spend a lot of money, have really high invested in accounts. I was eventually hoping that people like us could get a game mode that might actually incentivize around being harder, so a lot of players can't actually beat it. But I was also hoping at the same time the rewards weren't going to be something that is just super controversial. Like, imagine they gave as many jades as an endgame mode, then it would be a different story. But I was hoping we'd eventually get like a hard version of MOC, or like a hard version of any endgame mode. Really just anything hard to give people more challenges, for people that spend a lot, or for people that are also like min-maxers. Maybe they don't have many units because they vertically invested on their teams a lot. So let's say they have like E2 Castris, E1 S1 Hyacine, and they got that by skipping a lot of other units. And for them, they'd also be in the predicament where endgame mode is super easy. You can have an account that started just in 3.x and they spent time saving. They picked up Castris, maybe even got her E2, Tribi E1, Hyacine, and now also Evernight. Next half could be Finon team, because with Finon also did rerun Sunday Tribi for that exact reason, even Sparkle. And even if you didn't run Finon, there was Archer who's given up for free. You could pick up Sparkle for him during the Finon period, and that was your second team. There's a lot of options, so people that might have skipped a bunch of banners and just wanted to hyper invest into these two really strong teams, all the endgame mode would be a joke to them. So I myself always have been asking for a mode. I've asked in surveys, I've asked just in general, where if we can get a hard mode that is going to challenge people that spend money like I do, challenge people that have super high invested in teams that are like super meta, but also be something that doesn't really give insane rewards, that it's going to pressure people that are low spenders or people that play the game super casually, to where they can just completely ignore it and it's not really going to change anything for them. Lo and behold, finally in the 3.6 update, we got Anomaly Arbitration, which is now this new mode where you need 3 teams as opposed to 2. They all have their specific kind of gimmick, where one stage lowers your crit damage dealt every time you crit. One can deal some reflect damage to you and you need like a shield to mitigate it. You beat all 3 stages, you can weaken the main thing, and the main thing is going to be the Ligus, the King's in check boss, or whatever the hell it was called, where it's just a big beefy fight of someone we already do have in game. And this was mainly going to be something that, again, only people like me or min-maxers on those teams would be going ahead and doing. Personally, I do think the 3 stages, being the ones you do need to weaken the main boss, were actually done really well. They have a form of a debuff to make you consider your team building. Like, you don't want to run crit-based teams in the middle one unless you have enough investment where you can bypass it. I was also asking for something like that in many surveys and many kind of game mechanics. I was really hoping that eventually they would lean into more gameplay mechanics, where it would really screw you over if you use a certain archetype as opposed to other ones, where it would just really mess up a certain meta archetype. Even as a follow-up enjoyer, there was a specific idea I had in mind for follow-up debuffs, where it would lower your follow-up debuff, where it would lower your damage from follow-up attack sources by a certain amount, like 70%. Because then that would incentivize for you to not run anything follow-up related, unless it's like Aventurian or something, just because he's staying on other teams and you can kind of mitigate his damage anyways. And instead would tell you to use something else. So you can use the traditional hyper carry on there. You can go to dot, and if they wanted to screw over dot, they can lower dot related sources. For break, they can lock the toughness bars. That kind of debuff form for certain teams and certain archetypes to make you encouraged to pull for more. Well, not pull for more, because, they already kind of do that. Encourage you to team build with other kind of archetypes, so you're not just specifically using this for every single mode, because that gets boring. They didn't exactly do that, but there are some forms. Like, again, the middle stage is if you crit them, you will lower your crit damage dealt, which is going to kill follow-up teams technically, because you crit on that. Ruins any form of crit-based team, so you're mainly focused on using dot, especially because the enemies are tailored to dot, and also break. So I think these kind of 3 debuff stages are really done well. And for people that might have, more crazy accounts that are horizontally invested in as well, they can still mess around on these stages. I find myself often trying to mess around with teams like I do similarly in MLC. And of course, it is harder in this because there are debuffs going against you as opposed to MLC, where it doesn't really punish you for anything. Of course, some are going to be favored with the type of enemies that are on there, the weakness that you are running. But it does definitely get you thinking on how you want to do it. If you want to go for 0 cycles like I do, it definitely requires you to optimize more, which brings us to the next part what I wanted to talk about. The requirements. So I'm glad the actual eligibility to do the Knights in check doesn't really require you to 0 cycle all 3 stages. You can just do them in, I think, 2 cycles or less to get the full rewards. And that can be great for people that are going to clear it. Like, again, let's say they have a really high invested in Castra's team. They might have a good invested other team that doesn't do too well on like the middle. And the third team is kind of rough, so let's say they get 0 cycle Castrus and then maybe 1 cycle and then 2 or 3 cycles, and they probably still can challenge the main one to give it a go. Of course, that will obviously very, very, very differ from player to player. Not everyone is going to have a super invested in Final team. Same thing with Castrus team, Archer team, Break team, Dot team, so on. But overall, I definitely do think the idea they did of debuffing certain ways is very, very nice. Encourages you to differentiate what you run normally. And I am pretty happy with the direction they did go with it. Now for the Knights in Check boss. It's an existing boss of Lagus who just has an incredible amount of HP, and they also threw in the, I don't even remember their names, enemies for the first wave, which did filter a lot of people, which I can definitely understand. They do insane amount of damage and soak up a lot of damage. I think they were really, really, really close with this because, again, I was hoping for a match that would give people like me a lot of struggle. But unfortunately, something I really don't like about this stage in particular is what you are forced to run. Even to this day, if you have a very high invested ult team, like let's, for example, say like an E6 Akron with like an E2 Xiaochu, E2 plus Aventurine, and then E2 plus something else, I don't know, I'm just going to say Sparkle or Sunday in that case. With that kind of team, you're not going to have problem fully getting stars in Pure Fiction, fully 0 cycling MOC, and you could still mess around with team building. My problem is, when it comes to 0 cycling the brand new Knights in Check boss, you can have these E6 characters from 2.x, and you're probably not gonna beat it still. I think these bosses and the way Lagus works and everything was way too catered towards Phynon and Castrus, because I myself can't even do it with my E6 Anoxa. And mind you, that is a 3.x unit with all like the E2 supports that I do have. I have to use Evernight on a team, as this is mainly catered towards Castrus E2+. If you have an E2+ Castrus team built, especially with Hyacine, which is like, non-negotiable on that team, it becomes a breeze. E2 Phynon, some work you have to do, but he's the other win card you do have. And that's my biggest gripe about it. I was really hoping they would make a stage that is going to be really hard, but really good for min-maxers and people that have, these high dupes in their favorite units. Like to run a E6 Akron team or like a E6, again, like my Anoxa team, E6 Aglia team, you are most likely 99% sure not going to 0 cycle it. And that is what I don't like. I really wish they did cater more towards where if you have these really high invested teams, or again, min-max teams where you just have some busted ass relics, and maybe even like E2, E1, and so on for these specific speed tunings, DDD setups, and that would let you get to it. But no, to actually do this, if you're on the non-E6 side, you would need an E2 Castrus, you would need an E2 Phynon with a bunch of support dupes, and that's kind of really all you can do, unless you also have a really, really, really invested in Evernight like I do. Those are really the 3 only cases where you end up doing this fully. And so that's why I really do think they missed the mark on this. They were so close to making it good. 3 teams as opposed to 2, so it encourages more team building and more unit diversity. Check. Debuffs to make you encourage more team building as well. Check. Very hard but not impossible to beat for the 3 stages that weaken the boss. Check. Final stage being something that min-maxers and maybe even whales of previous favorites that aren't fully just wailing on every meta character. Uncheck. That is really my only gripe with it. Maybe in the future they'll release more bosses that can, be done a lot better with like an E6 follow-up team, an E6 Akron team still. I kind of doubt it. I think it's definitely going to be something that's shielded towards new units once we move on to like 4.x stuff like Castrus, Phynon. I don't even think they'll work anymore. That's why I'm a bit iffy on this mode because of that. And another checkbox would be the actual rewards of it being something majority of players can ignore because they're maybe not strong enough to beat it. Also check, it's not something you have to do. It doesn't give you anything worthwhile. It doesn't give you any jades. You can completely ignore it and go about your day. So yeah, I definitely do think they missed the mark with that. It's kind of not the funnest when you have to use like the brand new shiny shield DPS. Because even I know so many people complain about like you have to have the brand new units to clear MLC, Pure Fiction, APOC and stuff. You don't. If you vertically invest in your favorite teams, you can still do it. Like if you vertically invest in Fei Xiao and her follow-up team, you can very much still use that team in both APOC and also MLC and fully clear. In this, however, that is no longer the case. Like, I get if it's vertically invested to a point, like maybe like E2, E1s of older units can't clear. I get that it's going to mainly be catering to newer units still. But to straight up have it to where, unless it's like Castris, Finon, Evernight specifically, and you just can't do it, that's kind of like the creativity just gets kind of blown there. So, my first impressions of this whole game mode is I think it was almost perfect. The fact the last stage really pushes you to use these very specific DPS catered units is my really only gripe with it. I just find that a little annoying. I can't really do funny team shenanigans on there just because of that reason. I have to use my Evernight clear, or I have to use my Casters plus Evernight, or if I want to pray out to RNG God, I have to do an E2 Finon setup. Which figuring out how to do it with that E2 Finon team was definitely fun. It definitely challenged me and it definitely got me thinking. Which is another thing I like about this mode is it gets me to think as opposed to MLC where I'm just mindlessly clicking buttons. But yes, my first impressions is I'm satisfied, but I could have been more satisfied if they just, you know, made it to where you could still definitely clear with high invested in older teams. Because it's one thing for like a slightly invested in team to just get absolutely destroyed, and that would make sense, like an E2 Akron team with no other Eidolon and anyone else, or like just an E1 Aglia and like no dupes and anyone else and not many SIGs. That is definitely like you're not going to beat it. But you could probably have an E6 Aglia again, like I said, E6 Anoxa, E6 Fei Xiao, and you probably still could not beat it. So once again, satisfied, but could have been a bit more to make it perfect. And this does bring the video to a close, going over the Anomaly Arbitration mode and my gripes plus my likes with it. Definitely comment down below if you're someone who was able to clear it, or if you're someone who's even just going to ignore it as it doesn't really impact free-to-play players at all. If you did find this video helpful or enjoyable in any way, shape, or form, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell for future videos like this along with all the types of style content. Once again, remember to check the description to join the Discord server, and I'll see you later. Peace out.